He didn't mean to stop at the nursery door. He only meant to walk past it, like he'd done every night since the funeral. But tonight, something cut through the silence of that mansion like a crack of lightning. A laugh. A small, bright, unmistakable laugh. His daughter's laugh. For the first time ever. And it didn't come from a therapist's office or a hospital corridor or one of those sterile progress reviews where people spoke about his children like they were charts. It came from inside his home, and it came with someone else's voice, a man's voice, low and playful, doing something ridiculous. Gideon Brooks froze in the hallway, hand still on the knot of his tie, breath caught halfway in. For a second, he honestly believed his mind had made it up. Grief does that. It gives you mirages. It gives you comfort that turns out to be air. So he listened harder. And the laugh came again. Then a sound that hit him even harder than the laugh, because it was smaller, softer, almost like it had to fight its way out. A little squeal of delight. His fingertips went cold. His children had been labeled "no progress possible" so many times that the phrase had started to sound like a verdict, like a life sentence. No meaningful response, no intentional communication, no social reciprocity, just silence, just stillness, just absence. And now, behind that door, his daughter was laughing like a child who felt safe. Gideon's stomach tightened, because if that laugh was real, then everything he'd been told was wrong. And if everything he'd been told was wrong, then he was forced to face a question he'd spent 2 years avoiding. What if the problem wasn't that his children couldn't reach him? What if the problem was that he never truly reached for them? Quick one before we keep going. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're here for dignity, fairness, and real accountability, hit like and subscribe, because we tell stories that do not let power hide behind money. Gideon pushed the door open. The nursery lights were low, warm, gentle. Rain tapped the window like someone trying not to disturb the moment. And there, near the far wall, was Reuben, the gardener. The man Gideon barely registered most days, the one who moved like a shadow through hedges and flower beds, trimming perfection into shape. Reuben was standing on the soft rug, knees slightly bent, arms lifted like a fool on purpose. He had a small object in his hand, something homemade, something simple, and he was making it talk in a silly voice, a little puppet, a stitched bird with a crooked beak and button eyes. Reuben wiggled it, made it flap, then made it sneak behind his own shoulder as if it was shy. And in the corner, nestled in a beanbag chair with a blanket tucked around her, Gideon's daughter Maya was watching. Her eyes were wide, locked onto the bird. Her mouth was open. And she laughed again. Not a cough, not a random sound. A laugh that rose and fell with the movement, like she was following the joke. Gideon's heart slammed so hard it hurt. His son Jonah was on the floor nearby, lining up wooden blocks in a neat row, as he always did. But even Jonah had paused. He was watching too, from the corner of his eye, like he didn't want anyone to catch him caring. Reuben didn't notice Gideon at first. He was fully committed to being ridiculous. The little bird puppet tiptoed across Reuben's palm, then tripped and fell dramatically into the carpet. Reuben gasped, loud and theatrical, then whispered, "Oh no, Captain Buttonbeak has fallen. We need a rescue team." Maya's laughter bubbled again. Gideon stood in the doorway, frozen, throat tight, eyes stinging. Then something else flared up inside him, sharp and hot. Anger. Because joy like this didn't just appear. Not after years of nothing. Not after specialists had looked him in the eye and told him to prepare for a lifetime of quiet. So if his daughter was laughing, there had to be an explanation. And Gideon's mind, trained to control, trained to solve, trained to protect by owning every variable, snapped to the darkest option first. "What are you doing?" Reuben flinched at the sound of Gideon's voice. The puppet froze midair. Maya's laugh cut off like a candle snuffed. The room changed instantly, like someone had lowered the temperature by 10 degrees. Reuben turned slowly. He was a tall man, older, with hands that looked like they'd spent their whole life working. His face was calm, but his eyes held that careful alertness of someone who knows how quickly the world can turn. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly. "I didn't hear you come in." Gideon stepped into the room, shutting the door behind him with more force than he meant to. Maya's body had gone still. She looked away now, not at Gideon, but at the corner where the curtains hung. Her fingers pinched the edge of her blanket hard. That stillness was familiar. That retreat, that disappearance, and it hit Gideon like a warning. Whatever Reuben had opened in his daughter, Gideon had just shut it again by walking in. And that was unbearable. He pointed at the puppet. "What is that?" Reuben glanced at the bird in his hand, as if surprised it was still there. "It's just something I made, sir. Just something you made." Gideon's voice came out colder than he intended. He moved closer, eyes narrowing, scanning the room like he expected to find hidden cameras. "My daughter hasn't laughed in her entire life. No one has ever heard her laugh. Do you understand what that means?" Reuben's gaze flicked towards Maya, then back to Gideon. "Yes, sir," he said, softer. "I understand." Gideon's jaw clenched. "Then why were you in here?" Reuben didn't flinch from the question, but he didn't rush either. He answered like he knew that speed could be mistaken for guilt. "Miss Asha asked me to fix the window latch earlier," he said. "It was sticking, and the rain was coming in." Gideon's eyes cut to the window. The latch did look newer, shinier. Reuben continued. "Maya was here with Miss Asha, Jonah too. When I finished Maya, she was watching me. So I did the bird. I didn't think. I just did it." Gideon's anger wanted to stay standing. It wanted to be righteous. It wanted to protect his heart from hope. But his heart was already cracked open, and in that crack something painful seeped in. Maya had been watching him, Reuben, not watching Gideon, because Gideon wasn't someone she could watch safely. Not yet. "Where is Asha?" Gideon demanded. As if on cue, the door opened again, gentler this time. Asha stepped in. She was the housekeeper, but the word didn't fit what she actually was. She moved with a quiet steadiness, like a person who'd learned that calm could be a shield. She took in the scene in one glance. Gideon's posture, Reuben's stillness, Maya's retreat. And she didn't look surprised. She looked ready. "Mr. Brooks," she said, voice low. "You're home early." Gideon pointed again. "Why's the gardener in the nursery?" Asha didn't answer immediately. She walked over to Maya first, not rushing, not touching, just sitting down a few feet away, on the rug at Maya's level. She spoke softly, not like she was trying to pull Maya back, but like she was keeping the doorway open. "It's all right, sweet girl. We're safe." Maya didn't look at her, but her breathing eased. Asha turned her face towards Gideon. "Reuben was fixing the latch, sir." Maya noticed him. "That's all." "That's all!" Gideon snapped. My daughter laughed. Asha nodded once like she was confirming something she already knew was possible. "Yes, sir. She did." Gideon stared at her, like she'd just admitted to breaking the laws of physics. "How?" Asha's eyes held Gideon's without challenge, without fear, without flattery. Because she wasn't trying to win. She was trying to protect the children, not from Gideon's money, from Gideon's storms. "It wasn't a trick," she said. "It was safety." Gideon scoffed. "Safety? You think I don't provide safety?" The words came out before he could stop them. Asha didn't react like an employee being accused. She reacted like a woman hearing a hurt man speak from the only language he knew. "You provide security, sir," she said gently. "Those are not the same thing." Gideon's face tightened. That line hit him where he lived, because Gideon Brooks could buy security like oxygen. He had gates, guards, systems, doctors on call. He had a house so large it echoed even when everyone was home, and yet his children had lived inside it like ghosts. Asha glanced towards Maya again. "When children have lived through fear," she continued, "they don't open for money, they open for presence." Gideon felt something in him twitch, defensive. Fear. They've never been harmed. Asha's gaze didn't waver. Sir, they lost their mother. Gideon's throat tightened. Don't. Don't say it like that. Like he hadn't lost her too. But Asha didn't say it to blame him. She said it like it was the center of everything. They lost their mother, she repeated softly. And then they lost the sound of the house being warm. Gideon's eyes flashed. I hired the best. I brought in specialists from 3 countries. I bought equipment, therapies, programs. He was listing receipts like they were prayers. Asha nodded again. I know, sir. And in that nod, Gideon heard something unbearable. Not admiration, not gratitude, just sadness. Because she knew he'd tried, and she also knew it wasn't enough. Reuben cleared his throat quietly. Sir, if you want, I can leave. Gideon looked at him. Something about Reuben's humility felt like a mirror Gideon didn't want to face, because Reuben had just done what millions couldn't, and he had done it by looking foolish on purpose. Gideon's voice dropped. Give me the puppet. Reuben hesitated, then stepped forward and placed the little bird in Gideon's hand. It was softer than Gideon expected, worn in places like it had been held often. Gideon stared at it. A crooked little stitch at the side. A thread color that didn't match. A handmade imperfection. He turned it over, and on the underside, barely visible, were initials written in faded ink. S.B. Gideon's breath caught, his wife's initials. Serena Brooks. The puppet slipped slightly in his hand, like his fingers had forgotten how to hold things that mattered. His mind flashed. Serena at the kitchen table years ago, laughing, sewing something small, saying it didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be loved. Gideon's throat tightened. Where did you get this? He whispered. Reuben's eyes lowered. I made it, sir, but the pattern wasn't mine. Gideon's head snapped up. What do you mean? Reuben swallowed. I knew your wife. The room went silent in a deeper way. Even the rain felt quieter. Gideon stared at him. That's impossible. Reuben's voice stayed soft. Not impossible, sir. Just hidden. Gideon's hands trembled slightly around the puppet. How? Asha shifted gently on the rug, as if she could feel Maya listening through her stillness. Reuben looked at Asha like he wasn't sure if he should say it. Asha nodded once, permission without words. Reuben spoke. Before your wife passed, she used to volunteer at a small community center on the south side. They did crafts with children, after-school, weekend programs. I was the groundskeeper there. Sometimes I helped set up, sometimes I fixed broken chairs, and sometimes I sat and watched her bring quiet children out of their shells with nothing but patience. Gideon's stomach twisted. Serena never told him, or maybe she did, and Gideon didn't listen. Because he was always running, always building, always earning, always providing. Asha's voice came in, low. Serena had a gift, sir. She understood that healing is not always loud. Gideon's eyes stung. He looked towards Maya again. She was still turned away, still gripping her blanket, but her shoulders weren't as tight now, as if her body was listening to the truth and relaxing a fraction. Gideon's voice cracked. Why didn't she tell me? Asha didn't answer, because the answer would hurt. So Reuben answered in a way that was kind. Maybe she did, sir. Maybe you were just far away in your mind. Gideon flinched like he'd been slapped. He wanted to argue. He wanted to defend himself, but the laugh he'd heard minutes ago sat in the air like evidence, and the puppet in his hand sat like a witness. Gideon turned towards the door. Everyone out, he said sharply. Asha rose slowly. Sir, please, not like this. Maya will shut down again. Gideon's voice tightened. I said out. Reuben stepped back. Asha lingered a second longer, eyes searching Gideon's face. Then she nodded once. As you wish, sir. They left. The door closed. Gideon was alone with his children, and that, strangely, felt harder than any boardroom. He stood there holding the puppet like a man holding a key to a door he didn't know how to open. Maya stayed turned away. Jonah returned to his blocks, but slower now, like he was listening too. Gideon's chest rose and fell. He tried to speak. "Maya," he said, voice softening without permission. "Baby girl. Did you laugh?" Maya didn't move. The silence returned like it had never left. Gideon swallowed, eyes burning. He didn't know what to do, so he did what he always did. He tried to control the outcome. He stepped closer. Maya flinched, her breathing quickened, her fingers tightened on the blanket. Gideon froze, because he saw it clearly now. His presence didn't soothe, it alarmed, not because he was cruel, but because he was unfamiliar. A stranger who shared her blood, a man who lived in the same house, but didn't live in her world. Gideon backed up slowly, and as he backed away, he saw something he'd never noticed before. On the shelf by Maya's chair was a small notebook, worn, soft at the edges, a ribbon marker hanging out like it had been used often. Gideon walked towards it carefully, like the air might break. He picked it up. The cover was plain, but inside, on the first page, was Serena's handwriting. "If you ever feel like you're failing them, remember this. Children do not need perfection. They need a safe place to land." Gideon's vision blurred. He turned the page. There were lullabies written out, simple, some with silly words, some with notes like, "Maya likes the soft humming here, and Jonah relaxes when the rhythm is steady." There were little drawings too, doodles Serena must have done while waiting for something. And tucked between two pages was a photo Gideon had never seen. Serena sitting on the floor of a small room, surrounded by children. And in the background, half out of frame, was Reuben, younger, standing near a doorway holding a box of craft supplies. Gideon stared until his chest hurt. He had thought Serena's world was fully known to him, but she'd had an entire life of softness that Gideon never stepped into, because he was too busy being the kind of man people applauded. Gideon lowered himself into the nursery chair, slowly. The puppet rested in his lap. He looked at Maya, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to fix her. He just sat. Minutes passed. Maya didn't turn. Jonah lined up blocks. Gideon's mind screamed at him to do something, but the notebook's words pressed against him. Safe place to land. So Gideon breathed slowly. He didn't speak. He didn't move towards her. He didn't demand. He simply stayed. And in that staying, something inside him cracked again, deeper, because he realized the cruelest truth. He had been physically present in this house for years, but emotionally, he'd been absent. He'd been a provider, not a father. And now, the most invisible people in his home were doing what his power couldn't. They were bringing his children back to life. The next morning, Gideon called a meeting. Not in the boardroom, in the living room. Asha stood near the doorway, calm but cautious. Reuben stood slightly behind her, hands clasped. A therapist Gideon employed stood nearby too, tablet in hand, already tense. Gideon paced once, then stopped. "Asha," he said. "Reuben, sit." Asha blinked. "Sir?" "Sit," Gideon repeated. They sat on the sofa, still unsure if this was a trap. Gideon sat opposite them, notebook on the coffee table between them, like a confession. He cleared his throat. "Last night I heard Maya laugh," he said. The therapist's eyes widened. That's extraordinary, Mr. Brooks." Gideon lifted a hand to silence her. "Not extraordinary," he said quietly. "Just real." He looked at Asha, and I watched her shut down the moment I entered. Asha's expression softened slightly. "Yes, sir." Gideon's voice tightened. "Why?" The therapist began to speak, but Asha did first. "Because you entered like a storm, sir." The words were gentle, but they landed heavy. Gideon swallowed. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Asha said. Gideon stared at her. "Then teach me." The room went silent. Reuben's eyes flicked up, surprised. The therapist looked offended, like she'd been bypassed. Asha didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply nodded once, like a person who'd been waiting for this moment. "Then we start with one rule," she said. Gideon leaned forward. Asha's voice was low and firm. You stop trying to be their solution. You become their safety. Gideon's throat tightened. How? Asha placed her hands on her knees. You learn their language. Maya's language is quiet. Jonah's language is pattern. You meet them where they are, not where you wish they were. The therapist cleared her throat. Mr. Brooks, with respect, structured intervention is critical. Asha's gaze stayed on Gideon. Structure is critical, yes, she said, but structure without love becomes control. Gideon felt that like a blade, because control was his default, and love, the kind that required vulnerability, was what he avoided. Gideon nodded slowly. What do I do today? Asha didn't hesitate. Today you sit in the nursery for 15 minutes. You don't speak. You don't touch. You don't call their names. You just let them see you exist without demand. Gideon blinked. That's it? Asha nodded. That's it. Gideon looked at Reuben. And you, he said. Reuben straightened. Yes, sir. Gideon held up the puppet. You made this based on Serena's pattern. Reuben nodded. Yes, sir. Gideon's voice cracked slightly. You knew her. Reuben's eyes lowered. I did. Gideon swallowed. Then you will keep coming into the nursery, he said, when Asha says it's all right. The therapist's mouth opened. Mr. Brooks, I'm not sure that's clinically advisable. Gideon's eyes hardened. Then you're free to resign. The therapist went quiet, because Gideon Brooks didn't play when he made decisions. But this decision wasn't about ego. It was about hope. And Gideon had finally realized hope wasn't purchased. It was built. Minute by minute, presence by presence. That afternoon, Gideon sat in the nursery. Just like Asha told him, he felt ridiculous. He felt useless. His mind kept trying to turn it into a task. Count the minutes, measure a response, look for progress. But he forced himself to breathe. Maya sat in her chair, blanket tucked under her chin. Jonah sat on the floor, blocks lined like a tiny city. Neither looked at him. Gideon's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to promise, to explain. But he didn't. He just stayed. And then, something small happened. Jonah slid one block slightly out of the line, then slid it back, then out again. A tiny, repetitive motion. Gideon watched. He realized Jonah was listening to the sound it made on the floor. A soft scrape. A rhythm. Gideon remembered Serena's note. Jonah relaxes when the rhythm is steady. Gideon swallowed. He picked up a block slowly, making sure Jonah could see his hand. He didn't invade Jonah's space. He just held the block. Then he gently scraped it once on the rug. Soft, slow. Jonah paused. His eyes flicked towards Gideon's hand, just for a second. Then he looked away again, but he didn't flinch. Gideon's breath caught. That was more contact than Gideon had felt in 2 years. After 15 minutes, Gideon stood quietly and left. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, because the truth hit him again. His children weren't unreachable. They were just guarded. And Gideon had been knocking like a man with a battering ram. Asha found him there. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him. Finally, Gideon whispered, voice rough. She laughed. Asha. Asha nodded. Yes, sir. Gideon opened his eyes, wet. What if it was a fluke? Asha's gaze stayed steady. Then we create more moments for it to happen again. Gideon swallowed. And if I ruin it? Asha's voice softened. Then we start again. Because love does not quit, sir. Over the next week, the house changed in ways Gideon didn't expect. Not because Gideon renovated anything, but because Gideon stopped treating the nursery like a problem to solve and started treating it like a home to live in. He began coming in at the same time each afternoon. He sat. He breathed. He let Maya see him without pressure. He let Jonah hear him without commands. Sometimes Reuben came in too, and Asha said it was all right, and Reuben did what he did best. He brought softness disguised as foolishness. He made the bird puppet whisper secrets. He made it sneeze dramatically. He made it dance badly. And slowly, Maya's eyes returned to the world, not every day, not like a movie miracle, but enough that Gideon began to believe. The tension didn't disappear, though, because Gideon's sister Celeste came to visit. Celeste was sharp, polished, used to managing Gideon's public image since Serena died. She walked into the living room like she owned the air. She kissed Gideon's cheek, glanced around. Then she noticed something. Asha's schedule sheet on the sideboard, the hand-drawn routine, the simple language. Safe voice, slow hands, gentle light. Celeste picked it up and frowned. "What is this?" Gideon took it from her. "It's the children's routine." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Since when do we let staff run routines like this?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "Since it started working." Celeste's gaze flicked to the hallway. "I heard a rumor," she said slowly, that Maya made a sound. Gideon's chest tightened. "A laugh," he said. Celeste's face shifted, something like disbelief mixed with suspicion. "And you think that came from what? A gardener doing clown tricks?" Gideon's voice hardened. "Reuben did more for my daughter in 5 minutes than your elite experts did in 2 years. Celeste's nostrils flared. "Gideon," she hissed, "don't be naive. People will say anything for money. They will manipulate you." Gideon's eyes flashed. "They aren't manipulating me." Celeste leaned closer, voice lowering. "You're a billionaire with a grieving heart. That makes you vulnerable." Gideon stared at her. Then he said something that shocked even him. "Maybe I should have been vulnerable a long time ago." Celeste froze. Gideon continued, voice tight. "Serena was vulnerable. She was present. She knew our children. And I was always gone." Celeste's mouth opened. "Gideon, you built an empire for them." Gideon's eyes burned, and I left them alone inside it. Celeste's face hardened. "Be careful," she warned. "If you let this housekeeper and gardener become heroes, the world will eat you alive." Gideon's voice dropped. "Let them try." Celeste left that night angry, and Gideon felt the old pressure creep back in, the fear of scandal, the fear of being mocked, the fear of being seen as weak. That fear kept him awake. And in the early hours he went to Serena's study, a room he'd barely entered since she died. The air smelled like old paper and lavender. He stood in the doorway, heart pounding like he expected grief to attack him. He walked to her desk, opened a drawer, and found another notebook, this one thicker. He flipped it open, Serena's handwriting again. But this wasn't lullabies. This was a journal, not daily entries, just moments, little scenes, like she was recording what mattered. Gideon's fingers trembled as he read. "Maya laughed today when Reuben made Captain Buttonbeak fall dramatically. I nearly cried. Gideon would have cried too if he could slow down long enough to see her." Gideon's throat tightened. He flipped the page. Jonah lined up his blocks, and when I scraped one gently, he looked at me. "Not long, but long enough. The world is there. It's just quiet." Gideon's eyes burned. He turned another page, and then he saw it. A note Serena had written to herself. "If anything happens to me, make sure Gideon learns that presence is the currency our children need. Money cannot buy trust." Gideon's breath shuddered. He covered his mouth, tears spilling before he could stop them. Because Serena had known. She had known the danger, not just of her illness, but of Gideon's distance, and she had been trying, in her gentle way, to leave breadcrumbs back to the children, breadcrumbs Gideon had ignored. Until now. The next day, Gideon did something that terrified him more than any hostile takeover. He apologized, not in a speech, not with a gift. He apologized with honesty. He walked into the nursery during Maya's calm time. Asha was there, humming softly. Reuben was not. Jonah was stacking blocks now, a new pattern. Maya was holding the puppet, rubbing the button eye between her fingers. Gideon sat on the rug, a few feet away. Asha's hum didn't stop. She glanced at Gideon, a silent question. Gideon nodded, throat tight. He spoke softly, not to demand a response, but to offer truth. "Maya." "Jonah." "Daddy, sorry." No reaction. Gideon swallowed. Daddy was here, but Daddy wasn't here. His voice cracked. I thought building everything would protect you, but I forgot. You needed me. Asha's hum softened, like she was holding the atmosphere steady. Gideon continued, voice trembling. I don't know how to do this, but I want to learn. He didn't reach out. He didn't push. He just let his words sit in the air like an offering. Minutes passed. Then something tiny happened. Maya's fingers paused on the puppet. Her eyes flicked, not fully towards Gideon, but slightly in his direction. Asha's chest rose in a slow breath. Gideon didn't move. He let that flicker be enough. Later that week, the first purposeful response came. Not speech, not a miracle, a squeeze. Gideon was sitting in the chair, reading from Serena's lullaby notebook in a low voice. Not performing, just reading. Maya sat beside him, blanket tucked around her. Asha was nearby. Jonah was on the floor, quietly rocking as he lined up blocks. Gideon finished a line of the lullaby. And then, without looking at him, Maya's hand slid slowly onto Gideon's wrist. Her fingers curled. A gentle squeeze. Not an accident, not a random brush. A squeeze that held for 3 seconds, then released. Gideon's breath stopped. His whole body went still. Asha's eyes shone. Gideon didn't move, scared he would scare her. He whispered, barely audible. Thank you. Maya didn't look at him, but she didn't pull away either. That night, Gideon sat in Serena's study again and whispered into the empty room. I'm coming back, Serena. I'm coming back to them. A month later, Gideon introduced an AAC tablet again. He had tried before, but it had been shoved into their world like another device, another demand. This time, Asha did it differently. She didn't force it. She placed it near Maya during calm time with just 2 big buttons. One with a picture of a bird, one with a picture of a hug. No pressure, just availability. Days passed. Then one afternoon, Reuben came in, did Captain Buttonbeak's dramatic fall, and Maya laughed, not as loud as the first time, but clear enough that Gideon's heart lifted. Reuben paused, grinning. Captain Buttonbeak is honored, he whispered. Maya's eyes flicked to the tablet. Her finger hovered, then pressed the bird button. The tablet spoke in a gentle voice. Bird. Gideon's mouth fell open. He looked at Asha like a man seeing sunrise after years of night. Asha nodded, tears in her eyes. She chose it, sir. Reuben bowed slightly like the puppet deserved it. Captain Buttonbeak thanks you, Miss Maya. Maya laughed again, and Gideon laughed too. But the tension didn't vanish, because just when the house started to breathe again, Gideon received an email from his corporate legal team. A reporter had caught wind of a miracle child story. They wanted an interview. They wanted footage. They wanted the narrative. Gideon stared at the screen, anger rising, because the world always wanted to consume what was sacred. Celeste called 5 minutes later. I told you, she said. They'll spin it. They'll turn your children into content. Gideon's voice was cold. No one is filming my children. Celeste sighed. Then protect your brand another way. Control the story. Gideon's eyes narrowed. I'm done controlling everything, Celeste. You can't be, she snapped. That's why you're successful. Gideon's voice dropped. Maybe that's why my children went silent. Celeste went quiet. Gideon ended the call. He walked straight to the nursery. Asha was there, humming. Reuben was there too, fixing a loose hinge quietly. Maya was holding the puppet. Jonah was rocking gently. Gideon sat down and told Asha about the reporter. Asha listened. Then she said something that grounded Gideon like a hand on his shoulder. Then we keep this sacred, sir. Gideon's throat tightened. How? Asha's gaze was steady. You choose your children over applause. Gideon nodded. He turned his phone off. He canceled meetings. He stayed home. And the next morning, he did something no one expected. He went outside with Reuben, not to supervise, not to complain, to learn. Reuben handed Gideon a pair of gardening gloves. Gideon stared. Reuben's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Your wife used to wear gloves like these when she helped at the center, sir." Gideon swallowed. Reuben showed him how to plant lavender, how to loosen soil, how to be patient with something that didn't respond instantly. Gideon realized the lesson wasn't about flowers. It was about fatherhood. That afternoon, Gideon brought a small pot inside. He placed it near the nursery window. Maya watched. Jonah watched. Gideon didn't say, "Look." He just let them notice. Reuben made Captain Buttonbeak inspect the lavender, then sneezed dramatically. Maya laughed. Jonah's lips twitched like he was trying not to smile. Gideon felt tears sting again. Because this was what Serena meant. Play is therapy. Safety is medicine. Presence is wealth. Halfway through that month, a moment happened that nearly broke everything. Gideon came home late one night, exhausted from a crisis meeting he couldn't avoid. He walked into the nursery too quickly, too loud. His shoes made a sharp sound on the floor. Maya startled. Jonah covered his ears. Maya's face tightened. Her hand flew to her blanket. She turned away, hard, fast, shutting down like a door slammed. Gideon froze, guilt flooding him. He backed up, heart pounding. Asha stepped forward instantly, voice low. "It's all right, sir." "It's all right." Gideon's throat tightened. "I ruined it." Asha shook her head gently. "You stumbled." "That's different." Gideon's eyes burned. She shut down. Asha nodded, because her body remembers fear. But she also remembers safety now. We will remind her. Gideon swallowed. "How?" Asha pointed to the chair. "Sit." Gideon sat. Asha hummed Serena's lullaby. Slow, steady. Reuben, who happened to be in the hallway, stepped in quietly and lifted Captain Buttonbeak. He didn't make jokes. He simply held the puppet where Maya could see it, still and gentle. Minutes passed. Maya's breathing eased. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. Then, slowly, she turned her head just enough to see the puppet. And in that moment, Gideon realized something powerful. This wasn't fragile like glass. It was strong like a muscle. It could be rebuilt. It could grow. But only if Gideon stopped expecting perfection from himself. Only if he stayed. That night, Gideon sat alone and whispered a truth he'd never said out loud. "I'm scared, Serena. I'm scared I don't know how to be what they need." And in the quiet, he remembered another line from her journal. "Love doesn't arrive fully formed. It learns." Weeks later, the house felt different. Not louder, just warmer. Staff moved with less tension. The nursery door stayed open more often. Gideon started eating dinner earlier, closer to the children's routine, not after midnight phone calls. He began reading Serena's lullabies out loud, even when the words made his throat ache. Maya laughed more. Not daily, but enough. Jonah began doing something new, too. He started placing one block slightly closer to Gideon's foot when Gideon sat on the rug. A tiny gesture, a quiet invitation. Then came the day that changed Gideon forever. It was a Sunday morning. Sunlight spilled across the nursery floor. Reuben was there, puppet in hand. Asha was folding blankets nearby. Gideon sat in the chair, not speaking, simply breathing. Maya watched Captain Buttonbeak. Jonah lined blocks. Reuben made the puppet peek at Gideon, then hide like it was shy of him. Maya giggled. Then Jonah did something he'd never done. He reached over, pressed the AAC tablet, not the bird, not the hug. Asha had added a third button quietly, only a few days earlier. A simple picture, a man sitting, a father. The tablet spoke. "Dad." Gideon's breath stopped. His world went silent, but in a different way. A holy way. Gideon looked at Jonah. Jonah didn't look back, but he didn't move away either. Gideon's voice came out broken. "Yes, buddy. Yes." "I'm here." Asha covered her mouth, tears spilling. Reuben bowed his head, quiet. Maya watched Jonah, then watched Gideon. And for the first time, she didn't turn away. She looked at him. Just a second. Then she pressed the hug button. The tablet spoke. "Hug." Gideon didn't move. He looked at Asha like a man asking permission to breathe. Asha nodded gently. Slow. Gideon moved slowly, carefully, like approaching a frightened animal. He opened his arms, not grabbing, not pulling, just offering. Maya hesitated, then leaned forward, not fully into him, but enough that her forehead rested against his chest for a moment, a brief, fragile contact. Gideon closed his eyes, tears spilling silently. He didn't hold too tight. He didn't turn it into his moment. He simply stayed still and let her choose. When she leaned back, Gideon whispered, voice shaking, "Thank you." Reuben's puppet clapped silently like it was trying not to disrupt something sacred, and Maya laughed again, soft, bright, real. That evening, after the children were asleep, Gideon went to the kitchen. Asha was there, washing a cup. Reuben was leaving through the side door. Gideon called his name. Reuben paused. "Yes, sir?" Gideon held up Serena's journal. "I read it," he said. Reuben's face softened. Gideon's throat tightened. "She knew you." Reuben nodded. "She was kind, sir." Gideon swallowed. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Reuben's voice was quiet. "It wasn't my place, sir, and I didn't want to bring pain into your home." Gideon's eyes burned. "You brought healing into my home." Reuben looked down. Gideon stepped closer. Then Gideon did something that shocked both men. He held out his hand. Not money, not authority, just a hand. Reuben stared at it for a second, then took it. Their grip was firm, simple, honest. Gideon's voice cracked. "Thank you." Reuben nodded once. "You're welcome, sir." Then Gideon's eyes narrowed slightly, a new question surfacing. "Reuben, were you at Serena's funeral?" Reuben's hand stilled. Asha's eyes flicked up from the sink. Reuben's voice was low. "Yes, sir." Gideon's throat tightened. "I don't remember seeing you." Reuben's gaze held something heavy. "I stood at the back." Gideon swallowed. "Why?" Reuben hesitated. Then he said something that planted a seed Gideon would not sleep on. "Because I promised her I'd check on the children if anything ever happened." Gideon's chest tightened. Asha turned slowly, eyes widening. Gideon stared at Reuben. "Serena asked you to?" Reuben's voice was quiet. "She didn't ask, sir. She looked at me when she got sick. She said, 'If Gideon stays busy, my babies will need somebody who remembers softness.'" Gideon's breath shuddered. He looked down at Serena's journal in his hands. Then he opened it again, flipping quickly. And there, tucked behind the last page, was something he hadn't seen before. A folded photograph. He pulled it out. It was taken at Serena's funeral. A candid shot, slightly blurred. Serena's casket in the distance, guests dressed in black, and at the back, near a pillar, stood Reuben. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was who stood beside him. A woman Gideon didn't recognize, holding a small child, and Reuben's hand rested gently on the child's shoulder, like protection. Gideon stared, confusion prickling. "Reuben, who is that?" Reuben's jaw tightened slightly. Asha's voice was soft, cautious. "Sir." Gideon's eyes stayed on the photo. Reuben didn't answer right away. Then he spoke, slow. "That's a story for another day, Mr. Brooks." Gideon looked up sharply. "Another day?" Reuben's eyes held Gideon's, not disrespectful, just careful. "If you want it, sir, I'll tell you. But not tonight. Tonight, your children called you Dad. Let that be enough for one night." Gideon's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. Because Reuben was right. Tonight was sacred. Tonight was the first time Gideon felt like the house belonged to love again. Months later, the mansion looked the same from the outside. Still tall, still guarded, still expensive. But inside, it was different. The nursery wasn't a silent museum anymore. It was a room where laughter visited, where small choices happened, where a father sat on the rug, scraping blocks softly because his son liked the rhythm, where a daughter pressed a button that said hug and meant it. Gideon still ran companies. He still had power, but it no longer defined him, because the greatest status flip had already happened. He used to believe he was the provider. But the truth was, the most invisible people in his house had become the source of healing. Asha, with her calm routines, Reuben, with his foolish puppet, Serena, with her hidden breadcrumbs, and Gideon, finally learning the kind of wealth that can't be stored in a bank. Presence. The lesson Gideon carried, the one that changed him for good, was simple. Money can build walls, but it cannot build trust. Money can hire experts, but it cannot buy safety. The people you love don't need you to be impressive. They need you to be there. And if this story hit you somewhere personal, if it made you think about who you're providing for and whether you're also truly present, drop a comment that says, "I'm coming back." Not for me, for you. Because sometimes the real miracle isn't a first word. Sometimes the real miracle is a person choosing, day after day, to stay. And one last thing. That photo from the funeral, the one with the woman and the child beside Reuben. Gideon kept it. Not because he wanted drama, but because Serena had never left meaningless clues. And deep down, Gideon knew. The house had healed. But Serena had also left him a door to a truth he hadn't earned yet, a truth that might explain why Reuben had been invisible in Gideon's life, but never invisible in Serena's. And if that door opened, it might change everything Gideon thought he knew about family.